Hello everyone, Pithy here, and I'm here to talk to you guys about two decks from the Commander 2018 precons. And these two are decks that I think are personally the least powerful, slash they don't really fit their themes that very well. And it is the Esper and Jund deck. The Esper deck's theme is top of the library matters, and the land deck is, or the other one is land deck. Basically, it's landfall and trying to get your cards, or get synergy from like your lands, going to the graveyard and stuff like that. So first off, I'm going to talk about the Esper deck, and as far as I can see from the Esper deck, there is only about roughly 8 cards that actually care about stuff being on the top of your library, and you knowing about the stuff in your library. So, we're going to go over a few of them. Conundrum Sphinx. Whenever it attacks, each player names a card, then each player reveals the top card of his or her library. If the card a player revealed is the card he or she named, that player puts the card into his or her hand. If not, it's put on the bottom of his or her library. So you can stack your deck with your commander, Enema, Emmy, not I don't know, the Fate Shifter. You can stack your deck with a specific card and name that card and get it back into your hand. So basically, it's like you just drew a free card. With Conundrum Sphinx. Now, Conundrum Sphinx actually is a pretty good card if you know what the top card of your library is, because if you always know what the top card is, you always get that free card advantage. Another card is Dustmantle Seer. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player reveals the top card of his or her library. They lose life equal to that card's converted mana cost it puts into his or her hand. Now, you can stack the top of your deck to where it's a land, and then you just draw the land, and then you don't take any damage, while everyone else most likely takes damage. Gin of Wishes, remove a wish. It comes in with 3 wish counters, and pay 4, remove a wish counter from it, and reveal the top card of your library. You may play that card without paying its mana cost. If you don't, exile it. So once again, stack your deck. You can cast a card for free. So now these cards, these are definitely cards I think that are very good. It's just that there's not a lot of them in the deck to really take really good abuse of that. And you have a card that doesn't even really work with your strategy at all, which is Sphinx of Dwar Isle, which is 6 mana 5/5, Flying Shroud. You may look at the top card of your library. So you just look at the top card of your library. You don't even get to play the card. And that's just something that's not very good. Yes, you'll know the top card of your library is, so it makes a Conundrum Sphinx a lot better, or a Gin of Wishes makes it better. That way you know that you're guaranteeing something. But it just doesn't help your strategy besides just knowing what that card is. And there are other cards in the deck that just I think are very weird, like Sarah Avatar. Power toughness equal to your life total, and when it's put in the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. This card does nothing in this deck besides being a big creature, and it's something that is just very weird. This is taking up a mythic slot that could be better for something else. It could literally be any other card and it would just be better. Otherwise it's just a 40/40 or whatever your life total is, because there's not really much life gain in this deck. And there are miracles, which is something that this deck has. There's not that many miracles, but there's a decent amount of them, and they're not that bad. So like you get Entreat the Angels, which is one of the most powerful miracles, because you can significantly reduce the cost to get a huge board of angels really quick. You also have Devastation Tide, which is a really good board sweep. It doesn't kill things, and it also affects you too. So it's one of those cards I think that it would be better just to avoid. But if you want to use Miracle, it's one of the best Miracle cards. And then you have Banishing Stroke, which is a card that is literally just bad, personally, because you could just play a better removal spell, like an actual exile or destroy, and this would probably actually be better. You know, like play a Vindicate, and it's just better. So I don't think this card's very necessary. Plus, I mean, if you think about it, if you don't even have your setup for your miracles, this is just a 5 or 6 mana, put something on the bottom of someone's library, and then what they could do is they could just shuffle their library, and that card's back into their deck, and they could still draw it again. Another card for a miracle is Terminus. Put all creatures on the bottom of their owner's libraries, which is a very powerful card and is up there with Entreat the Angels in terms of power level. It is a basically 1 mana board wipe if you can set it up, which is really good, and it's just a very powerful card. And then Entreat the Dead, which this deck only plays about 26 creatures, so I don't know exactly how well this is going to be. And what it is basically like the black version of Entreat the Angels. Return X creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Well, this is a very powerful card. It's just, I don't know really what's worth getting pack in this deck, besides your, you know, rares and mythic rares. That's not Serra Avatar, because it shuffles into your deck. And I just don't really know. And you have a weird, like, reanimation type package, and stuff like Phyrexian Delver really doesn't make sense to me in this deck, because you don't really have creatures that you want to reanimate in this deck. And another one, too, is like High Priest of Penance. Whenever it's dealt damage, you may destroy target non-land permanent. And I just don't understand why some of these cards are in here. These don't even work with what the deck's supposed to be. And you have your commander, which, you know, can set up your draws. Also, you can flicker a card. And there's not too many of that effect either, to actually be able to abuse the enter of the battlefield effects of cards. There's really not that many of them. And I think that was a huge oversight with this deck, because you get a really good commander option, which is Yennett Cryptic Sovereign, 5 mana, 3/5, Flying, Vigilance, Menace. Whenever it attacks, or the top card of your library, if that card's converted mana cost is odd, you may cast it without paying its mana cost, otherwise draw a card. So this is a very powerful card, and there's a lot of setup in this deck. Like, you can set up the top of your deck, it's just there's not too many cards that actually care about the top of your library. And same thing with, like, Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. It basically does the same thing, except it doesn't care if it's odd or not, and it just reveals the top card. And you put that card into your hand, each opponent loses life equal to that card's converted mana cost, which is very good, very powerful, because it just gives you card advantage, and it can deal damage to your opponents too. So, like, there's really good cards in the deck for the strategy. It's just there's not enough ways to either set up your deck. A very good way to set up your deck that doesn't require you to have to play a creature or a one-time spell. And, like, you have manifest cards in here too, like Cloud Form, Light Form, and Jeskai Infiltrator. Also Primordial Mist, but you can't really see that one because they don't have it on here yet for Goldfish. But this is one of those things, is these cards aren't really that great if the top card of your library isn't a creature, and if you don't have any of your setup cards, you're just casting these, and you might not even get value off of these cards to actually flip up a card to do that. Like I said, you only have 26 creatures in the deck, which, you know, isn't too much, but I don't know if it's enough to really warrant you to play the manifest cards. Even though Primordial Mist, it kind of gets around that, and you can basically flip the card, and then you can, no matter if it's a creature or not, you can just play it. But you do have to spend the mana to be able to cast it, so I don't know. But it's just something that is weird. And there's a few other cards in the deck that really don't care about your strategy at all, about like stacking the top of your deck. Because you have stuff like Aether Mage's Touch, which cares about the top 4 cards of your deck. If you put a card on top, and then you cast this, you might actually find a card better in the top 4, or in the other 3 cards than what you put on top. And then all this does is really abuse the enter the battlefield effect, which we don't really have that many. We have Sphinx of Athun, let's see, what else? Phyrexian Delver, Meldrifter, and Pilgrim's Eye. Like, that's pretty much it. And then I think there might be an enter the battlefield card here. Which there's the Sower of Discord that isn't really that good for enter the battlefield trigger. And that's kind of the thing. The problem with this deck is that there's just not enough ways to really abuse the top card, or to stack it in such a way to where you know you're hitting something good. Off of like your or look at your top 4, look at your top 8, or something like that. And also you have a commander that literally does nothing in this deck, which is Varina, Lich Queen. Whenever you attack with 1 or more zombies, draw that many cards, and discard that many, you gain life. You gain that much life, which I guess that's the 1 life gain card that works with Sarah Avatar in this deck. But you have a whopping total of 2 zombie cards in this deck. Or 3 zombie cards with Phyrexian Delver. So you only have 3 zombies in the deck, so you can only, at maximum, draw 3 cards and discard 3 cards with this in play, unless you have Army of the Damned, which gives you 13 2/2 black zombies. But it's also another bad card in the deck, unless you really want to try and abuse Yuriko to hit people for 8 damage. But it's the fact is that this card just isn't great, and it costs so much mana to be able to use, just so you can possibly draw, 13 more cards, to discard 13 more cards. And I just don't know if having this is even worth it in the deck. It just doesn't seem very good. And I'm just not a big fan of Army of the Damned in this deck, because it makes no sense. It doesn't work with any of the strategies besides the zombie one. And then you have to get to the point where you can cast Army of the Damned to be able to do that. And then your board gets wiped, so then your zombie strategy's out the window. And that's one of my biggest problems with this deck. It just doesn't seem very focused on what the actual goal of the deck is supposed to be. It also, another thing is it has 40 lands in the deck as well, which is a high number. Even though you get into the 8 mana, 9 mana cost cards, you still have a decent number of ramp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana rocks in the deck. You have a whole bunch of ways to draw, and you have a Pegasus that gets a plains from your plains card from your deck, puts it into the battlefield, and puts the other ones into your hand, depending equal to the difference. And then you have Pilgrim's Eye that can also fetch you a land. So it seems like there's too many lands in this deck for this deck to actually. It feels like you would just draw more lands than you would actual spells, because you have so many ways to thin your deck of land cards to actually, Pegasus can thin plains from your deck, and then Pilgrim's Eye can get some lands, and then you have mana rocks. Like, you already have enough ramp in order for you to really be good, but that's the problem, is whenever you draw a bunch of lands, that's most of the time when you're going to lose, and it's just one of the biggest problems with this deck. Me personally, I made a version of this deck, and it is slightly cheaper in paper than this is, but it has a few other cards that are very, that I think that would be very good. Okay, so we have Dacra Mystic, a 1 mana 1/1, pay a blue, tap. Each player reveals the top card of his or her library. You may put the revealed cards into their owner's graveyards. If you don't, each player draws a card. So it's kind of like a group huggy card, but also if you can know what's on the top of your library, it can really help you, because you're like, oh, well, this is really good, so I would want to have this. So you just activate your Dacra Mystic, and then you get the card, which is very simple, very easy. Augury Adept, which is when it deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library, and then put that card into your hand, gain life equal to the converted mana cost. So essentially what it does is it draws you a card. Always. It always draws you a card. It doesn't matter if it's a creature, it doesn't matter if it's an enchantment or anything like that. As long as it can get in combat damage, you get to draw. You also do gain life as well. So it's also something that's very good. So I also put in Skill Borrower, which is something that you can definitely just not put in or not have. Skill Borrower, 3 mana, 1/3. You play with the top card of your library revealed, and as long as the top card of your library is an artifact or creature card, Skill Borrower has all activated abilities of that card. If any of the abilities use that card's name, use this creature's name instead. So that is actually quite important. So this is just basically a value card. There are some cards like Dacra Mystic, Sigil Starfish, which I kept in the deck, that it can copy its abilities, which is actually pretty good. There's also some other ones that are pretty good as well. I put Cryptolid and Annelid in the deck. 4 mana, 1/4. When it enters the battlefield, scry 1, then scry 2, then scry 3. So it can allow you to, in the early game, it can allow you to put bad cards to the bottom of your deck, which is something that's very good. And it can also set up future draws. So like that way, like, oh well, next turn I need Terminus. So, you know, if Terminus is on the top 5 cards in my deck, I can probably be able to find it. So it kind of gives you that option to be able to do that, and it's just a good blocker too. It's a 1/4, so it can block stuff in the early game very nicely. We have a Descendant of Saramaro, 4 mana, 2/3. Pay 1 in a blue. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of cards in your hand, and put them back in any order. So if you have 7 cards, you'll look at the top 7 cards of your deck, and then you can set them up in a certain order of how you want to draw them, or to abuse any of your top X amount of cards stuff. So this is actually just a really good value card. It is a card from Kamigawa, but it is actually not that bad in this type of deck that wants to abuse the top of your library. I also have basically just the backup Brainstorm, Riverwise Augur, you know, draw 3, put 2 on the back of your top of your library. So you got that. I did put Prognostic Sphinx in the deck, which is a good beater on its own. It's a 3/5 flyer, and then whenever it attacks, scry 3. And that's the main reason why it's in the deck. And I actually really do like this card. So I did keep in Sphinx of Dwar Isle, but it's a card that I don't think is very worth it to put in. But it's alright. You know, you can still know what's on top of your deck, so it sort of works with the strategy, just not really that well. There's another card in here, Second Sight. So Second Sight, 3 mana, instant. Look at the top 5 cards of target opponent's library, then put them back in any order, or look at the top 5 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. It has them entwined for 1 blue. So you can screw over your opponents with their draws. You can force them to draw bad cards, and you know, and then leave their good cards on the bottom of the 5 cards. And then, or you can just have it to where you stack your deck in the way that you want to draw them, which is actually something that I think is very good. Even just for 3 mana, doing that one effect, and even just playing 1 more blue for both of them isn't bad. And it gives you information as to what one of your opponents has. So there's that. Also, something that I didn't do is I didn't change any of the brand new cards, because these are cards that were exclusive to this set and they weren't reprints. And what I did was just change the reprints to other cards that I think that were actually worth putting in and actually considering to put into the deck. So we have Druidic Satchel, which is 3 and 2 to tap, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put a 1/1 green sapling creature token onto the battlefield. If it's a land card, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. And if it's not a creature, non-land card, you gain 2 life. So this is basically a way to ramp, gain life, or put a body onto the board, which is something that gives you a lot of versatility. And you can set this up too. You can put 2 lands on top of your deck, Druidic Satchel, and put the 1 on the battlefield directly, and is something that's very good, and you can also have instant speed blockers if you don't have blockers currently, and also gain life that might potentially save you from dying. And I just really like this card in this deck, and since you're already stacking your deck, you might as well get some free value off of it. Next up, we have Oracle's Vault. Like I said, we're stacking the deck, so X on the top card of your library to end a turn, and you may play it, put a brick counter on it, and then so it just allows you to cast that card for 2 mana more, but 2 mana more isn't too backbreaking. But if you put enough brick counters on it, you can access the top card of your library until on a turn you may play that card without paying its mana cost, and it only requires 3 brick counters in order to do this. So you can start stacking your top of your deck and start casting cards for free. With all you gotta do is just tap your Oracle's Vault, which is definitely very good. Next we have Soothsaying, which is basically the same thing as the Descendant of Soramaru, except you can also pay 5 to shuffle your library, and instead of paying 2 for your hand, where X equal, like the look at the top cards of your library, is the X is equal to your hand size. This one you can just pay X, look at the top X cards of your library, and then put them back in any order. So this is like, once again, how you can kind of set up your draws and set up how you abuse your top of the library synergy cards. One of the cards I think was also just an auto-include, or should be an auto-include in this deck, is a Future Sight. Play the top card of your library revealed, and then you may play the top card of your library. So with with your commander, you can just draw a card, put a card on top of your deck, and then play that card. So it just seems like it's a good value card, and something that I personally think that should have been in this deck to begin with, and it's very weird why it's not. And then Baneful Omen. This is more just a fun card. If you're looking for like a big splashy card, this is basically just another version of the Ninja, Yuriko, and it's just a 7 mana version of that, pretty much, except you don't actually draw the card, and it's at your end step you reveal the card, and each opponent loses life equal to the converted mana cost of the card. So it's a way to push damage through, because like I said, we don't have like big creatures really, and it's definitely something that Baneful Omen can get in that extra bit of damage. And this is basically how I think that the deck should have been built, was more focused on top of the library synergy, especially since you had 3 cards just from the new batch of cards that actually cared about the top of your library. And it just seems very weird to why they built the one deck the way they did. So that's basically my thoughts on this deck. It's just, I think that they could have did better with this one, but this one still wasn't as bad as the Jund one. The Jund one, I don't even know what's going on in this deck. You have a weird like land synergy deck that has like only about 4 to 5 actually good land synergy cards, and like landfall cards, and then like not really that many good other cards. And it has this weird like reanimation package, and there's not really too many creatures that are actually worth reanimating in this deck, and it's just something that's very weird. So basically, there's a few cards in this deck that I just don't like, and for like the land specific stuff, one of the biggest ones is Zendikar Incarnate. 4 mana, star 4, and its power is equal to the number of lands you control. The problem with this card is it doesn't have trample, and it just eats a blocker every single turn, essentially, and that's all it does. It doesn't get in, it doesn't do anything when it enters, it doesn't do anything else whenever like other land stuff comes in. It's just a big dumb creature, that's all it is. And I don't really like that. But since it doesn't have trample and it's not really a consistent win condition. The next one is Baloth Woodcrasher, which is whenever, as landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +4/+4 and gains trample. So It's just a big creature that dies to removal, essentially is what it is, because people don't want to take 8 to the face, and these decks do have a decent amount of removal in them, and I just don't find that this card's worth playing. Now, you do get really good landfall cards. Avenger Zendikar and Rampaging Bailouts are easily two of the most powerful in this color combination. Avengers Zendikar, basically, if they can't deal with this, lets you win, because you just get a huge board of plants for each land you control, and then whenever a land comes in the battlefield, you put +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. And then with Rampaging Bailouts, you just put a land into play and you get a 4/4. And these two cards are very, very good and are excellent cards for a land-based deck. The problem is there's just not enough good other land support cards. Like Rebel Hulk is fine. It's just you gotta put it on a creature with trample, or else you kind of suffers the same thing with Zendikar Incarnate. And that's kind of like one of the bigger problems with that. And there are some other, like I said, there are like weird like reanimation cards. So like Stitched Together is in here. And I don't understand why you would really want that, because there's not really that many good reanimation targets. Like, you can get Avenger Zendikar, Rampaging Bailouts, maybe you can get a solo Zendikar back, but there's really not too many of actual good reanimation targets, for me personally, I don't think. And then looking at like the other stuff in the deck, Death Reap Altar doesn't make sense in this deck. Normally what you play Death Reap Altar in is a sacrifice deck. Because of Morbid, basically says whenever a creature died, you get the Morbid effect. And you get it for the turn. So at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, you may draw a card. So there's not too many ways to actually kill your own creatures, and there's not enough ways to kill other people's creatures to actually get a huge benefit off of this card. You might draw maybe 2 to 4 cards maximum off this thing, which just isn't good. And another really bad landfall card is Retreat to Hagra. Whenever land enters the battlefield, you get a creature can get +1/+0 and gains Death Touch. Or each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, the losing 1 and gaining 1 isn't that bad, but it's not worth playing the card. And definitely giving a creature +1/+0 and Death Touch isn't worth it either. And that's one of the biggest problems. And one of the weirdest cards in the deck is Moonlight Bargain. You go top 5 cards to your library. For each card, put that card into your graveyard unless you pay 2 life, then put the rest into your hand. I don't know why you'd ever really want this card. You could just have it draw a card that actually just draws you 5 cards, then with no downside, because you are in green, you can just draw 5 cards with no downside. Why would you really need this card? So it's just one of those weird things. This deck doesn't seem very good in this. Not to mention, if you look at Lord Windgrace, he loves lands. You know, he's like, oh yeah, whenever you discard a card, draw a card, and if it's a land card, you can draw an extra card. And then his -3 is you put 2 target lands on the battlefield from the graveyard. Very powerful effects for lands. But if you look at the alternate commanders in the deck, one of them is focused on the graveyard for creatures, to basically reanimate a creature, but instead of reanimating, you exile it and make a copy of it. A token copy of it, and then the copy exiles at the end of combat. Once again, not really enough creatures really worth it to actually reanimate. So it's just not good in this deck. And then Thantis, the War Weaver, 6 mana, 5/5, Vigilance, Reach. All creatures attack each combat if able. Whenever a creature attacks you or a player you control, put a +1/+1 counter on this. There is 0 synergy with this card in this deck. There is no way to deter people from attacking you. There's no way to do that, besides filling up your board with a bunch of tokens. And that's literally it. And it just doesn't seem like it's a very good card in certain scenarios, because you're forcing people to attack, and this guy only gets +1/+1 for each attacking creature that attacks you. So it doesn't even really help you out. It just does nothing. And I don't. This deck, I think, is probably the most poor built commander deck that we've ever had, because the land synergy in the deck is almost non-existent. You know, like, we don't have enough good land synergy cards. Now, of course, with the new cards, we do have Nesting Dragon, Crash of Rhinos, and Turn Timber Sower, which these are all really good land cards that care about the number of lands or stuff like that. Also, why does this deck have 43 lands in it? This deck doesn't need 43 lands in order for it to function as a land deck. At most, the deck should run 40 lands. And like I was saying with the Esper deck, is you have enough ramp to where you don't need this much lands, like this many lands. Now, this one is all focused on pulling lands out of the deck and putting them into play, but you don't need 43 lands, because it just hurts you. Because it suffers the same thing from what the Derevi precon does. Is, yes, Lord Wind and Grace, whenever you discard a land, you draw an additional card. Derevi draws you, you can discard 2 cards and then draw 2 cards. So you just pitch 2 lands, and then you draw 2 lands, essentially was how that would go. Lord Wind and Grace would be the exact same thing. You would discard a land, and then draw 2 lands. Because you have 43 lands in your deck. You have more lands than you do anything else in the deck, which is just not good. Because, yes, you are a land deck, but you don't have ways to play multiple lands besides explore. And you don't really have any other ways to pull lands out of your deck that, like, a mass way to do it. Like, the most amount of lands you can actually pull out of your deck is 3, I think, which is the Far Wanderings. Because I don't see any other card that actually pulls more lands out of your deck than that. So, I just don't think that this deck is even worth buying. Or, unless you literally just want the new cards from the set for this deck. Because, honestly, if I had to say that these cards are really good cards from this deck. Turn Timber Sower is very good. If you can put multiple lands in the graveyard, you can start pumping out the board with a bunch of plants. And then you can also return lands as well. But like I'm saying, it's just there's not a lot of ways to actually recur lands from your deck, and I just don't think that this deck is worth it. Without just buying it as it is, because you'd be better off just starting from scratch. And stuff like Flame Blast Dragon, I have no idea why this is in the deck. You know, it's just, I don't understand this. This deck just makes no sense to me. And whenever I was talking about this deck, I said that this deck looks like someone's first take on a commander deck. This is the first time that they built a deck for commander. They just didn't really know how to build it, so they just popped in a bunch of cards that they thought worked really good with the strategy, but then just ended up not really being that great. Now, for my list, so this is 76 in paper as of right now, but my list is 97, but it plays a lot of good cards that you would play in this deck if you were to improve it. So the biggest thing with this deck was to have more land synergies, because your commander is Lord Windgrace. So you want to have a lot of ways to either play additional lands or abuse the lands coming into the battlefield or being in the graveyard. So since Scoop Mob, honestly, is not really that great of a card, I think Dragon Master Outcast is just better. 1 mana 1/1, starts with the same stats. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, put a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying on the battlefield. So instead of putting all of your power onto one creature, you're dividing your power among the dragons. At the beginning of your upkeep, you're getting more and more dragons, and it's just giving you an actual threatening board state, as opposed to having one creature that gets blocked all day long. One of the best cards to actually fill the graveyard of either land cards or non-land cards is Satyr Wayfinder. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them into your hand and put the rest into your graveyard. Now, you can choose not to take that land and put it in the graveyard so you can get it with Lord Windgrace. Or you can just have it with another card in this deck that works as well. Courser of Crufix. 3 mana, 2/4, play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library if it's a land card, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. So it basically has a passive landfall effect that whenever a land comes in the battlefield, you gain a life, and you can play lands on top of your deck, so that hopefully that you can fix your drawing situation where you're not always drawing lands. Kind of gets you out of that. Also, ways to get lands back, which is very important for a deck like this that cares about lands and has a lot of sacrificed lands in them. So we have a Ramanap Excavator, which you may play lands from your graveyard. Simple. You know, you put a land in there, you can play it immediately, which is a really good combo with Lord Windgrace, because you discard a land, and then you draw 2 cards, and then you can play that land with Ramanap Excavator in play. You also, if you have enough money, you can put a Crucible of Worlds in this deck as well, to actually incentivize you, actually playing the combo with Lord Windgrace. Now, it's not much of a combo, because it literally just means that you just got a land on the battlefield and drew 2 cards for free, basically. And then, ways to play additional lands. This is very important for any singular deck that's land-based. Mina and Den Wildborn. 4 mana, 4/4, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. Boom. Simple, efficient, good creature, you play additional lands. That's what this deck wants. You want to be able to play multiple lands per turn. And it also has the ability red and green, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and that target creature gains trample. So with a Rubble Hulk, for example, you can trample up a creature and Rubble Hulk it to deal massive amounts of damage to somebody. And then that's also a very good thing with Landfall, because with Landfall you can play that land again and get another trigger off of your landfall or your cards to say whenever a land enters the battlefield, which is very good. Decklists the Fallen is basically another good value card that should be in this deck, but is not in the precon. Decklists the Fallen, 5 mana, 3/3, landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target player lose 3 life. If you do, put 3 counters on, +1/+1 counters on Decklists the Fallen. So basically, he just gets it big and big. Now, unlike Scoop Mob or the one of the other ones that care about landfall or amount of lands in play, he actually deals damage to somebody and is a big threat on his own. Whereas Scoop Mob is just a 1/1 until you get your 5 lands, and then it just gets bigger, but not really doing anything besides eating a blocker every turn. Whereas Decklists is getting in that 3 damage no matter what if a land comes to the battlefield, and being a big threat, big blocker at the same time, something that's very good. The Gitrog Monster. This card should be in this deck. There's no reason why this card shouldn't be in this deck, because it works great with Lord Windgrace, it works great with the turn Timber Sower, and that's something that I just think that is very unacceptable, why this card is not in the deck. Because at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Gitrog Monster and sacrifice a land. So whenever the land hits the graveyard, you will get a trigger on turn Timber Sower. So you get a plant. And then with Gitrog Monster, you can play an additional land on each of your turns. So it works good with Ramanap Excavator, or just in general, it works really good. And then whenever 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So you sack the land, you draw a card, you get a plant. If you discard a land with Lord Windgrace, you draw 3 cards instead of your 2 cards. And then you can just replay your lands with Ramanap Excavator, and you can get an additional land drop on each of your turns. So then those 2 lands that you pitched with Lord Windgrace and sacked with Gitrog Monster, you just get immediately back, which is something that's insane value engine with this deck. And you get so many more landfall triggers if you have a way to actually recur lands from your graveyard more consistently. And it's just a big oversight by Wizards to actually not have the Get Rock monster in the deck. Because, I mean, it's a about $5 card, and then if it got reprinted in this product, it would be cheaper, and it's actually a really good card. Titania, Protector of Orgoth. Whenever it enters the battlefield, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Another way to recur a land card. Now, of course, like, the lands in this deck aren't really too important, because this is a precon, so you don't have, like, super powerful lands. But being able to recur a land to either sack it to get Rock Monster or to trigger another landfall effect is well worth it. And then whenever a land you control is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, put a 5/3 elemental token onto the battlefield. So each time you pitch, you sack a land, or you get rid of a land off of the battlefield from on your side, you get a elemental token. And so you're generating a huge board state whenever you just sacrifice one of your lands. And this deck plays a good amount of sacrifice lands. Evolving Wilds, Metamorphic Expanse, Mountain Valley, Jund Panorama, Blighted Woodlands. You're just getting so much value off of this one card, and you can return your sacrifice lands as well to get even more value. It's something that I think should be in this deck. And lastly, for like the landfall card, like actual keyword landfall, we have Omnath, Locus of Rage. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. And whenever it or another elemental you control dies, deal 3 damage to target creature or player. So you can make a huge board state with Omnath, and also is Wrath protection. Because if someone wraths the board, and you have a bunch of elemental tokens, because of Titania, because of Omnath, you just can probably kill someone. And it's definitely a very big deterrent to wipe the board. And honestly, this is just a good card, and I have no idea why this deck isn't in here. Another good card, since lands are very important, and we have 40 lands, I removed 3 of the lands, so that way we can actually not get screwed over by our land drops and how many lands we have in our deck. We have Sylvan Awakening and Rude Awakening, and basically what they do is they turn our lands into creatures, and we can swing in with the creatures. So essentially what it does is it just allows us to win the game, have an alternate win condition that involves our lands. And that is very, very important since we are pumping out a bunch of lands anyways, we might as well have some ways to win with them. We also have Creeping Renaissance. If we lost too many lands, we can get them back. Same with Splendid Reclamation, we can just get our lands back for value. Now with this one, you will have to discard the hand size if you get back too many, but it also can get back creatures, so that's one thing as well. And I think that this deck is how I would play it. Whenever you get a land, enter the battlefield, you get an elemental token. This deck overall has so many ways to get value off of lands. You play additional lands per turn from Rites of Flourishing. You also get stuff like Mending of Dominaria, which recurs your lands and also fills your graveyard as well for some of your reanimation spells and your, filling your lands for your, Get Rock Monster, your Turn Timber Sower, and stuff like that. And I think that this is how I would play this deck. This is how I personally would build this deck, because even if you look at the price of this deck, if you go over to how these are, it is still the cheapest deck price-wise. Like, if you were to buy all of these cards just by singles instead of actually just buying the deck, this would still be less than the other decks. And you're getting a much better deck, personally. And then, of course, I think the mana base in this is fine. It's alright. But I think that this deck, this one, the precon, isn't worth buying. And I really don't even think the Esper one is really worth buying either. The two best decks, in my personal opinion, and I'm kind of like on the fence about these, is the Artifact deck, the Izzet deck, and the Bant deck. I think are the two best decks. And the difference between the two best and the two worst is significantly higher than I think that any other precons have been. Because even if you look at last year's, where you had the tribes, you had cats, vampires, dragons, and wizards. The weakest deck, precon-wise, was the wizards deck. The strongest two were dragons and vampires. And then the cat deck was about in the middle between the two. It wasn't too weak, but it also wasn't too powerful. And this is where these decks differ from last year's, or even the year before, is that you have two decks that are significantly weaker than the other two decks. And I don't find that that's very fair balancing, because I just don't think that it's really fair to the other decks. You know? And I think that these two, well, the cards that they introduced, the new cards that they introduced, are very good. A majority of them will be staples in certain decks. Like, I think that this Turn Timber Sower will be a staple in Gitrog. I think that Fury Storm will be a staple in majority of red decks that want to actually cast their commander, because it is a super fork. And there's also other like cool cards that make landfall a little bit more appealing, like Lord Windgrace. And also you get a commander that is more of forces people to attack. You can play him as more of like a, if you attack me, bad things will happen, and that's something that hasn't been introduced into Jund. Also, a unique reanimator type commander is also something that we haven't seen, that actually exiles the creature and then puts them into play, tapped and attacking, and then it's something that is just very fun. There's really good cards. For the new cards, there are really good cards, and there are cards that are worth buying, the decks for. Avengers Zendikar can go into any green deck, and Raging Bell is the same way. These are just really good cards, but it's just like, you know, for your about maybe 8, 10 or so cards, is it really worth buying this deck or buying this deck? I don't think it is. If you're buying them just for the commanders, the potential commander cards, I don't think it's really worth it. Now, of course, whenever Yuriko is like $15, you could literally just sell this and make about half of your money back. Then, I mean, like, yeah, obviously that's really, really cool, really good. But I think you'd be better off buying the Saheeli deck or the Estrid deck, personally. Because these are a little bit more built to actually take advantage of what they do, which is play artifacts or play enchantments and actually get stuff, good value off of them. Even though these decks aren't perfect, I still think that they are better precon-wise than the other two. Even though Lord Windgrace is an awesome, fun commander, and it's the same with this one as well. You know, the Esper commander, even like getting the first Esper zombie is pretty cool. There's a lot of cool cards in these, but I don't think that the cool cards really justify buying not so great cards to have to play around with. So that basically ends kind of my little rant about these decks, and I said personally, I like the new cards from the sets. I like the new cards, but I am very disappointed in how some of the decks are built and some of the cards that are placed into the decks. And I think that this is something that Wizards should address, that it literally looks like they just put cards in that they found in like a trade binder of just bad cards, and it just is not acceptable, especially as a commander product. If you're paying $40 for this, if you subtract these cards, like if you subtract the new cards from this, there's really nothing here that's really that worth buying. And I just don't think this is the kind of thing that they should be showcasing, because people love Commander. People really want to show, or people really want to see each year Commander decks that are fun or powerful or good. Because if you look in the most recent, like, 4 sets, Commander is very highly supported. Dominaria, the core set 2019, Battle Bond. Those are 3 really good Commander sets, and then you go here, and then the Commander precons don't match those sets. And I'm personally just disappointed, especially since Commander is my main format, and I always look forward to seeing the new Commander products every year and being shocked that they printed some powerful cards, or shocked that they reprinted some really expensive cards where you basically just made your money back with 1 card. And also to pay attention to this deck, it is, and also a lot of these cards will go down in price. So these aren't even gonna be $100 or $97, because a lot of these cards, if they were reprinted in this set, in this product, they would be cheaper. And that's kind of the thing, is that I think it was a big mistake not to print actual good reprint cards that are have a lot of price to them, so it makes them more appealing to other people as well, like collectors and stuff like that. Obviously Yuriko, if she maintains this price, she'll be definitely something, or even maintains the price or goes even higher, I think that she'd be worth the buy. But that basically ends this video. I might talk about the other 2 decks, but these 2 decks, the Bant deck and the Izzet deck, I think need the least amount of changes. Also, for some reason, MTG Goldfish has Loyal Apprentice as a green card in this deck, so that's pretty fun. But that's basically what I'm saying is, I don't find that these 2 decks, Nature's Vengeance and Subjective Reality, are worth the buy, whereas the other 2 decks I think are worth the buy because they're a lot easier to actually get up in price. Estrid can only really go up because Estrid is very powerful in combination with the Chain Veil. So I think that these cards, these 2 decks, Bant deck and the Izzet deck, are the ones that you want to buy, and the 2 that you want to stay away from is the Esper and the Jund deck, in my personal opinion. Now, it is possible that you love the Nature's Vengeance deck, or you love the Esper deck, and you're going to buy them no matter what. I just think that, personally, I wouldn't buy these 2, and I would just buy the singles. But like I said, that is just my personal opinion, and it's just my kind of concern is we have to wait another whole year for another Commander product, and I'm not confident that Wizards is going to make the precon decks actually worth playing, because it feels as though they just tossed a bunch of cards that they thought might be good in this deck, and most of the commanders, alternate commanders in the deck, don't even fit the strategy of what this deck is doing, besides the main one. So, easily the Jund deck is the one I'm most disappointed in, and I think it's just unacceptable for Wizards to do this. But that basically ends this video. I hope you liked me ranting on for about an hour about how bad these 2 decks are, and how I would build them to make them actually a presentable product, to make them actually something that people would want to buy, because that's personally this is what I think that these decks should be best shown as. And that's just basically the end of all the ranting and stuff. I really do hope you guys liked the video. If you did, leave a like, comment, and we have other content on the channel too that's pretty much Commander related right now, but we also have stuff coming up like Standard, Modern, and stuff like that. Maybe a little bit of Pauper in there. So subscribe so that you can get some cool videos about Commander and about the Standard, Modern, and Pauper. So this ends the video, guys, and I will see you later.